Okay, peace. This is going to be about the sexuality of Will Smith and Jada Pinkett. Basically, how they made it public, the different dilemmas. Dealing pretty much the gender war as well. How the different genders are incompatible and beginning to create a separation and a division between them, like a war. So I'm gonna break down some ancient texts and I'm gonna give context to what situation we're dealing with. This is out of the Srimad Bhagavatam. Basically, it's an ancient Eastern or Hindu text. Okay, so I'm gonna read. It says that in the Kali Yuga, which is the context, men and women will live together merely because of superficial attraction, and success in business will depend on deceit. Womanliness and manliness will be judged according to one's expertise in sex. Now, I'm gonna break it down in context with Will Smith and Jada Pinkett. Remember, this is the Kali Yuga. There's 4 yugas. These are 4 different stage or periods of a society or of a kingdom, a nation, or empire, or even an age. And you can break down the 4 different stages of a life cycle, like even your own individual life, and then apply it to your city, your village, your family, friendship, your relationship, and then even to your nation, to the whole nation. So the 4 yugas, which basically represents your ages, the Kali Yuga being the end or the darkest. Right? It's where it's the most demonic, the most harsh, the most more suffering. It's the least spiritual. It's the most mundane and materialistic and physical. And obviously lust would be huge during that 4th age, the 4th yuga. We'll deal with the 4 yugas at the end of the video, but let me just reference this quote and break it down. But it says, men and women will live together merely because of superficial attraction. So in the other yugas or the other ages, previous ages, or in a more divine state of a nation, the earlier states of a society, the men and women come together for different virtues, for different utilities. So what could that be? That could be to help their family, to raise their children, or to produce children for their ancestors, like for the village, or for their ethnic group, their race. This is called nationalism. It could be other virtues, which could be to basically use their relationship to bond 2 different parts of the villages, or 2 different villages together into one nation. So there's different utilities and different purposes why marriage was instituted as an institution. Because in the wild and nature, pretty much animals have different mating strategies, but pretty much all of them are based on a brutal or selfish intent. Even procreation itself, coming out of the natural world, is naturally from like a selfish drive that nature puts inside of the organism. But we'll deal with that in the future. But for now, let's just deal with men and women coming up out of nature and us starting to what you call regulate our sexuality through what we call marriage and through certain laws, sexual laws that are put in place in different societies. And these laws and regulations were put in place to keep society from collapsing. So a man and a woman can make an agreement that once they get past a certain threshold of their life together, when the sex starts to be least attractive, because you have to understand naturally, and this is the biggest point I'm making the whole video, biologically, after spending, I believe it's like 5 to 7 years with a mate or with your partner, your wife, or if you're a female, your husband, even if you're not married, y'all just being a couple, for 5 to 7 years, the sexual attraction basically disappears at a certain threshold, about 7 years. You know what I'm saying? And y'all basically become companions. And it's just based on compatibility and chemistry at that point, like a certain bond, like a friendship, or like brother and sister, basically, but closer than that, but not based on the sex anymore. So she might sexually start to fantasize about other men, and the guy might start sexually fantasizing about other women. And this is where cheating begins, infidelity, because we don't know our own biology. He's just going naturally about his life, and he doesn't know that at some point his biology is the light switch is gonna flick off, and he's not gonna be sexually attracted to her anymore. And she doesn't realize this either. So they just go through the processes of it, and they just end up being sexually attracted to someone else. You know what I'm saying? To other people. And if we understood this biological fact, then we could know what we're getting into before you court somebody, before you dating them to the point of getting married, and you know what you're making your commitment to. Your commitment is not to the sexuality, because biologically it's almost impossible, basically. Now, there's certain situations where people get married because the marriage is based on sentiment. We'll deal with sentiment. Sentiment is basically where it goes deeper than your sexual attraction for them. It's like a passion, or like a bond that's deeper than the sexual level of it. And that situation, when you got sentiment, like they may have known each other from childhood or childhood friends, or their families knew each other, or the villages raised them together. Well, in that sense, it's a certain level of passion or energy that's invested in that, to not really even pay attention to other women, or the man not pay attention to other women, or the wife not pay attention to other men, because they basically have this devotion to each other. It's like a deeper devotion because of the bond from childhood. You understand? So that's sentiment, but that's rare. So in a normal case, it's a strange man meets a strange woman, and these strangers find a level of sexual attraction to each other, sexual chemistry with each other, and they act that out for a good 5 years, and then when they reach the 5 to 7 to 10th year, it dies out. Okay, because they were strangers. They don't really know each other at the deepest core of who they are, which would have been known or been expressed in the early points of childhood development. That's when you would have seen who the person really is. Like if the person is really a coward and they're not a certain characteristic that they are as an adult, well, that adult has just learned certain behavior patterns and they're acting. They're fake. But when you'll know who they really are if you watch them while they were being raised as children. So adults are meeting each other past the age of 18, sometimes high school sweethearts, in high school, but basically grown already. And they already have this pretentiousness. They're hiding who they really are, but they may be sexually attractive, though. And they have sexual desires. So they act on that. But they don't act on a sincere, genuine aspect of who they are, their own soul, or they real subconscious drives. You know what I'm saying? They really it's just lust, really. So in that context, with biology dealing with nature, if you look at the black widow spider or just the certain species of spiders, you'll see that it's brutal. The sexual activity is brutal. Pretty much in all species, it's about conquest. It's domination and conquest. The females in some species get victory or dominate the males. In some species, the males dominate the females. Hardly in any species is it an equal playing field. It's a very brutal reality in nature. So that takes me to my next point. You have to understand, I deal with this philosophy all the time. And so when we're dealing with Will Smith and Jada Pinkett, you gotta understand they are A-list celebrities, especially Will Smith, but these two are like A-list celebrities that are known all across the world. Okay, this family. And they're probably the most popular family, especially black family, in Hollywood. So in America, period. They are the face, basically, like, of entertainment. So, and that makes them the face of the black community. So with dealing with that factor, we're dealing with the prime couple, the elite couple, not being able to adequately deal with what you call marriage or their sexuality. That should be a crisis, or should be a sign to all the different levels and classes of black people and Americans all across the country, that you ain't gonna be adequately be able to pull it off either, or successfully reach satisfaction with that institution either, of marriage either. And I'm speaking sexually. So I'm going to go back to the Srimad Bhagavatam. It says, men and women will live together merely because of superficial attraction. So you got to understand, initially they used to live together for purposes, for virtues. You know what I'm saying? For different distinct decisions and reasons that will be decided usually even by their parents, marrying off their children for certain reasons. But it says men and women will live together merely not because they genuinely love each other or because there's some type of affection or sentiment. But it says men and women will live together merely or only because of superficial attraction. Just how they look. That's it. You know what I'm saying? Initially, just how they look. And success in business will depend on deceit. We'll deal with that in the future, dealing with economics and money in the Kali Yuga, and how it be depend on deceit. But moving on, it says womanliness and manliness will be judged according to one's expertise in sex. So we see the whole community, the whole society in America is judging Will Smith, and even Jada Pinkett is basically putting on the table, judging Will Smith's character or his essence or his being, his manlyhood, basically, his masculinity based on his expertise in sex. Her basically just making the indirect claim or even direct claim that he's not satisfying her. So that's an assault, you know what I'm saying? That's a psychological blow, a psychological assault. Even if she's trying to be transparent, she can be transparent with a counselor in private, you know what I'm saying? So for her to make it public, even if this is all just like social engineering, like they're not really having marital problems, it's just all an act. Well, in that case, that's a conspiracy. We'll deal with that in the future too. But outside of social engineering, if they genuinely are having marital problems between these two, Will Smith and Jada Pinkett, then understand that basically she's assaulting his masculinity, his manhood. So if there was other males in the room that she had sex with, and she said he's not adequate with sex, let's say Tupac was alive. I don't know if she laid with him or not, but there's some sentiment. There you go. There's some sentiment between her and Tupac, right? So let's say if Tupac was in the room, Tupac was alive, and she said this to Tupac in front of Will Smith's face, in front of the whole country. That'd be humiliating, right? That's an assault. So in nature, in biology, that's what I was trying to say earlier. Before humans found a way to regulate sexuality, which we did around, let's say like 7,000 BCE, 8,000 BCE is like the institution of marriage. But before then, it's just wild. It's just nature. You know what I'm saying? It's just pure chaos. Look at the animal world today. You know what I'm saying? It's who you mate with is what male you able to defeat to get that mate. If you're able to kill that male or defeat that male, a lot of males in nature have been destroyed over the mating strategy, and that's what it's called. It's called the sexual mating strategies. And a lot of animals and sentient beings suffer or have been murdered or killed because of the competition over this sexual act. So in nature, it's brutal. So let me frame it. So in nature, like I said, dealing with philosophy, you have brutality, sexuality, and deception. What she's doing here right now is brutal. You know what I'm saying? If they weren't rich and wealthy and all of this type of stuff in the streets, like in any other third world country, it could get violent. This could get violent. You know, her cheating on him and doing all of this type of stuff. This stuff can get violent. Like in ancient Judea, like in the biblical text, the biblical period that we call the Hebrew culture, they would stone her to death. You know what I'm saying? If they found that she cheated, you know what I'm saying? That's their value systems. That was the way that they regulated sexuality. If they found that you was practicing infidelity or you cheated on your husband or your husband cheated on your wife, they stone them to death. You know what I'm saying? You know, or they'd separate them. You know what I'm saying? It'd be divorce, but it'd be violent. It wouldn't be just social conversation. It'd be a real assault. You know what I'm saying? Her doing that. Like even if you look King David and him cheating on, the woman cheating on her husband, the Hittite. His name is Uriah the Hittite, with King David. You know what I'm saying? The priests were ready to curse King David to death and basically to judgment, with curses and plagues and death because of what he did to Uriah the Hittite by sleeping with Bathsheba, right? And Bathsheba basically could have been stoned to death. It was violent. It was a violent act. It was an assault against Uriah the Hittite. Because literally David had Uriah the Hittite killed. He had him killed. He had him murdered to take his wife. You know what I'm saying? So with this young guy that Jada Pinkett was sleeping with, that she cheated on Will Smith with. I don't know if you can use that word in this context or not, but we just roll with it. But cheated on Will Smith with this young dude, the young artist, the young singer, forget his name. Basically, we see that he made a diss song to Will Smith. See, that's violent. That's brutality. So remember, nature, naturally, outside of human sexual regulation, which we starting to lose the regulation of that now because we're in the Kali Yuga, remember, the lack of human accountability where we start to go back to our natural wild instincts, which is just pure brutality, is three different factors that keep this wheel of the world going round. And that's brutality, sexuality, and deception. And so the brutality is, like I just said, the young dude being, violent or vocally violent toward Will Smith. Jada Pinkett violating and humiliating Will Smith. That's violent, you know what I'm saying? That's going against him. And the deception is her lying to him, basically. Just calling it, what she called it, a situationship, or she called it she called it an entanglement. You know what I'm saying? So she cheated on Will Smith, and basically she called it an entanglement. So basically that's deception. Remember I said brutality, sexuality, and deception. Sexuality, these are three different tools that are used in nature to be able to get dominance over a certain landscape or a certain ecosystem. So that's what the three animals use. If they don't have brutality on their side, they're not very violent animal, then they'll use sexuality. They'll reproduce very quickly. If they don't have sexuality on their side, then they'll use deception, like camouflage, tricks, snares, and all that type of stuff, like serpents and different animals that have camouflage. So those are the three tactics in nature. So moving on, let's move to the next scripture. But remember, the context in the Srimad Bhagavatam, the book that we was reading, is dealing with the Kali Yuga. So the last and darkest age of a age or a nation. Okay, so let's keep moving. It says, in the Kali Yuga, pleasure will be the only reason for marriage. Lust will be the only reason for womanhood. So Not in the previous ages, but in the last age, it says pleasure will be the only reason for marriage. Period. See, lust will be the only reason for marriage. Why would they put that implication there? Because initially, in higher, more advanced aspects or periods of society, marriage, like I said, was for a utility. It was for a reason. It had a significant contract that was written up with an agenda of why these two were getting married and what goals they were going to accomplish. You see, because really you can lay with any female in the world, you know what I mean, and it'd be a total disaster the outcome when you have children because there's nothing for the children to be invested in. There's nothing to account the children to be to do or to complete because there was no intention. So there's a lot of children in this world being born with no intentions, with no intention of their life, and that's why Willow and Jada, what's his name, Jaden and Willow are so emo. When I say emo, meaning they're so gothic like or so depressed a lot of times, that they express themselves. Period. Like in many of their different songs and many of their different interviews and so on, they express their depression and whatnot, their mental health. And what's significant about that is because they born with an intention, or were they just rich kids that was pretty much privileged and they don't know what to do. You know what I mean? That's going to be a value to their life. You know, and they're adults now. They weren't really guided on what to do because their very conception. I'm pretty sure if their conception was based on lust, there was no intentional motive of what their life would be. Their names they weren't given the names that have significant meaning, called theophoric names or intentional names about what they would accomplish before they die. See, and that's what blessings from your parents, the significance of blessings from your parents or your ancestors, your grandparents and elders in the village, in rites of passage is important, because rites of passage and ceremonial marriage were things humans instituted to spiritualize or to put an intention into what we're doing so we get an intentional outcome. Our motives will match our outcome and we'll be successful and we'll advance and we'll be able to get more utility out of our life, out of our existence as humans, as opposed to chaos and disaster and misfortune and then society collapsing and we're going to war with each other and nothing but suffering, the continuation of suffering. So anyway, like we said, the Srimad Bhagavatam said pleasure will be the only reason for marriage. Check. It says lust will be the only reason for womanhood. Very interesting, because you see today in modern society, men can get invested in a lot of different diverse things. I mean, we get it. It's natural. It's like in childhood. Just look in childhood. The males can get invested in sports. They can get invested in what's it called, technology. They can get invested in any type of vocation they can get into as kids, like fishing. They can get obsessed with a lot of different things. But you notice that a lot of the girls, they in childhood, they just only obsessed about their sexuality when they get older. So we're talking about marriage. Now, we also have a lot of families where they're raising their daughters to be exceptional or move outside of that box. But that's always been the exception. That's never been the rule. That's the exception, where the girl wants to be a scientist, or she wants to be an astronomer, or she wants to be a doctor. You know what I'm saying? These are exceptions. Normally, the female is just taught and groomed to just be prepared for marriage and do that the right way. If she doesn't have a father, if she doesn't have a stable household, or she doesn't have an adequate mother, let's just say that, or the mother isn't able to balance her life out with her husband and them being parents together, the girl may be raised not knowing the significance of being prepared for marriage or the significance of doing something else more diverse, like some other type of goal. She may just get obsessed with her sexuality. That's it. You know what I'm saying? Because of obviously social engineering and the movies and the music and the radio and all of this, it's influenced them to be hypersexual naturally, because that's what's in their hormones. So you have to use your neocortex to override your mammalian and serpentine brain. But they can't do that if they're in the early stages of development, because they don't have enough time to think and to contemplate what they're doing. So by the time they're 21, they already made their sexual decisions and their sexual constructs of what the value of sex is and what sex means to them. And by the time they're 30, it's sealed. They're not really going to change their attitude about sexuality, pretty much. So if they weren't taught correctly at the age of like 8, 9, 10 about what sexuality is and what marriage is, and if it's necessary for them to even get married or even practice sexuality when they get older, these are all different things that don't get put on the table. It's just they get influenced by probably the TV and the radio, and they just act it out in the dark or in secret. And whatever man is adequate, just male, not man, but male, that's adequate enough to satisfy their sexual urges. Let's just say that. So it says lust will be the only reason for womanhood. So in a Kali Yuga, there's different types of Shaktis. Majority of the Shaktis, if you look at the goddesses, they all have a principle behind them. You have goddesses of wisdom or education. You have goddesses of charity or compassion. You have goddesses of prosperity. So that's dealing with like economics and so on. So you have goddesses that preside over different principles in reality in our life. But what it's saying is these higher feminine principles or these shaktis will be deduced down to just the succubus or the demoness like shaktis or feminine principles or deities that are dwelling inside the woman, or the very lustful like fairies and apsaras. And if you study ancient mythology, because remember we're reading out the Srimad Bhagavatam, you'll see that this characteristic, this nature, is destructive in the mythology. You know what I'm saying? It creates damage and suffering and turmoil. So the higher feminine principles will be absent, and just pretty much lust will be the only reason for femininity or womanhood. So check. So that's the next text. So let's put that in context of Will Smith and Jada Pinkett. Really, all that she really talks about that I've seen, like literally like 40 to 50%, even probably more, 75% of what she has to express about is one is mental health issues, like like coping with depression and things like that, and the other is sexuality, just sex, 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 sex. I mean, it's all the time. Even with her daughter there, even with I think Jaden even there, it's just always about sexuality. The red table, and that's interesting. It's a red table. Keep that in mind. If you study the chakras, the red is the lowest and base principle dealing with the root chakra, the Muladhara chakra, right? So that's dealing with the most materialistic, mundane, or physical in your thinking and in your mentality. And sexuality is the root and sacral plexus or sacral chakra, and those are the lowest two chakras. You understand, the red and the orange. So I hope maybe next you'll have an orange table, and they'll just deal with nothing but sexuality. But anyway, back to the point. She has the red table. That is the root chakra. So let's move forward. It says in the Mahabharata. Now we're gonna go to the Mahabharata. It says lust will be viewed as socially acceptable and sexual intercourse will be seen as the central requirement of life. Like I said, just look at what society is expressing and embodying at this point. You know what I'm saying? You got Cardi B, we got Megan Thee Stallion, you got, we used to have Little Kim, but what's her name? Nicki Minaj. So basically lust will be viewed as socially acceptable. It's just socially acceptable. And sexual intercourse will be seen as the central requirement of life. So you have to understand there's 4 goals of life according to the ancient teachings. This is Buddhism, Shintoism, Taoism, Jainism, Hinduism, the yogic systems, shamanism. I mean, you can go to any of these different ancient spiritual paths, ancient teachings, even with the Gnostic or the Christian path. Go where you want. Hermeticism, it doesn't matter. The Greek philosophical schools, it doesn't matter. Just go to these different advanced spiritual mysteries and practices. You'll see in those schools, they teach us 4 goals of life. The first goal is material success. So that means having success with gaining enough resources to survive, right? So if society has figured out a way to successfully do that, and you as an individual has successfully have done that, then the next generation, or you, if you have the opportunity in your life, should go to the next level. And that would be marriage, right? That's called kama. So the first one is artha, the second one is kama, which means the satisfaction of procreation and having a family or a wife, you know what I'm saying, of pleasure. So that means food and a woman. And if you're a woman, obviously to be a man. So food and a partner. That's kama. That's the second level of success of society or you as an individual. The next generation, or even if you have the opportunity in your life, should be able to go to the next level of advancement. The third level, the third goal would be dharma. Dharma would be like charity or removing suffering from your family, your village, your people, your nation, and then the world. Dharma, basically people like that are born bodhisattvas or Buddhas or even born yogis or sages or saints. There's many different names, sadhus, rishis. They're born in Dharma. They're born with the first 2 already being fulfilled in their karma, their ancestral karma. They've already completed those 2. So they're born at the state of Dharma. Dharma is at the heart chakra. The first 2 are the first 2 goals are in the lower chakras. You see, I'm lining these things up spiritually through the chakras and even principally based on what's significant versus what's mundane. So after the third goal, which is dharma or like charity, basically helping and removing suffering from the world, you have the 4th goal, which most people that are born in the third try to attain before they die, and some are even born in that with only the 4th goal being the intention of their birth. and that's moksha, and that's basically spiritual attainment, spiritual liberation. But it can be expressed in different ways though, like through art, through science, through education, at high advanced levels of education. But the goal of that though would be to get liberation of your soul, to find out the truth, the supreme truth of your existence, and uh, to never die, be reborn, or reincarnate ever again. So that's moksha. So the problem is those last two goals, which are the higher principle goals, are not taught in the black community. They're not taught in American culture. They're not taught in grade school. They're not taught in colleges even. Well, they might be taught somewhere in the corridors of college, somewhere. But I'm just saying it's not mainstream culture. So just like the Mahabharata just prophesied in the Kali Yuga, Vyasa, the sage Vyasa, he says that lust will be viewed as socially acceptable. We there. Sexual intercourse will be seen as a central requirement of life. We there. So basically, no one focuses on those other two goals of life. They mainly only focus at this point as sexual intercourse being the central requirement. So that's why on all of the daytime TV shows, the talk shows, the radio, the hip hop songs, the R&B songs, everything is saturated, and everybody is infatuated with who they sexually going to be dating, who they sexually want to get involved with. But see, they wouldn't say sexual, they would say romance or marriage, and they put it in all these other contexts. But marriage is not based on your partnership with them or courting them. Marriage is based on what is your intentions and goals for what that agreement will be the outcome of. So if you don't have that at the table, like what is y'all vision together that y'all going to accomplish together while you courting her or out on a date, it's just lust. That's all it is. You know what I'm saying? You're trying to get enough chemistry to be able to lay with each other and deal with each other, like basically like a social arrangement. But the problem with that, like I said, is that's just lust. So that's what has totally consumed us and is everywhere all throughout our culture and society. And what does it do? It snuffs out those higher two goals, which is basically to remove all suffering. Meaning it makes you selfish. It makes you what's the word? Superficial, like their text earlier said, where you care less about the price of what this reality is, what life is. It makes you mundane, ignorant, so on. And it removes all of your spiritual inclinations, all your spiritual desires and goals. It robs you of all of that. So that's what lust does, and that's what society is drowning in right now. Because remember, we're in a Kali Yuga. Moving on. And remember, when we say Kali Yuga, Kali is not that Yuga, that age is not embodied by the goddess Kali. We'll talk about her in the future, but it's embodied in a demon named Kali. You got to look him up, but it's a demon named Kali, and he's a demon of lust. And I'll put a picture of him up so y'all can get a reference to that. But let's move on. It says moral values would decline to such an extent their minds would be preoccupied by nothing else but the thought of sex. So in the Kali Yuga, moral values, and that's what we see where we're at now, moral values would decline to such an extent their minds would be preoccupied. I mean, they'd be busy. They can't deal with spirituality. They can't deal with art. They can't deal with any vocational utility to bring some type of functionality and better quality of life into our society. Not ideas, no ideas, only just preoccupied by nothing else but the thought of sex. So that's why you see this whole argument with homosexuality or LGBT and all of the other letters that go with that. And we obsess and arguing over who people should be having sex with. And the reality is the fact that homosexuals are more obsessed with having the rights to practice their sexuality than they are to remove the suffering off this planet that's been here for over 100,000 years. All of the animals that are suffering, all of the third world people that are suffering in different conditions all across the world. Slavery is still going on in Africa, from Libya all the way through the west coast of Africa. All of these different crises that are going on, the murder rates that are down there in Central and South America, the murder rates in Baltimore, St. Louis, Detroit. You see where I'm going here in New Orleans? So we still dealing with a crisis. It's the opioid crisis, it's depression crisis, mental health crisis. I mean, I can give a whole list of like 30 different crises that basically still plaguing the planet. You know what I'm saying? Ever since the time of the Buddha and the time of these ancient sages and yogis when they wrote these texts. So we still dealing with the same context, the same type of mentality of people. Because remember, these comes in cycles. It's 4 cycles. They repeat themselves. And we back at the 4th again. So it says moral values would decline, meaning dharma. Remember, we said the third goal would be dharma. That's moral values. Dharma would decline to such an extent their minds would be preoccupied. Remember, their minds would be busy by nothing else but the thought of sex. So that's what you see with Jada Pinkett, is basically who she's sleeping with, who she's wants to sleep with, who she's not satisfied with sleeping with. You know what I'm saying? It's just a broken record, you know what I'm saying, on the radio, on the TV, in the movies of just sex being the theme. And remember, sex sells, so that's how media is going to utilize it. But moving on, so we see that this prophecy is true, just written by Sage Vyasha. So with that, we're going to deal with Will Smith and his spiritual exploration, what he spiritually has been exploring. We see that Will Smith, he's claimed that he studied the Bhagavad Gita. I'll put a clip.
I've been reading this, the Indian holy book, the Bhagavad Gita. This is what my books look like when I read. You see all of this, like that's what my books look like. When something's really hot, when an idea is hot, I kind of stir it up. As you can see, the Bhagavad Gita is very, very stirred up. I'm loving it. I've been reading this, the Indian holy book, the Bhagavad Gita. This is what my books look like when I read. You see all of this, like that's what my books look like. When something's really hot, when an idea is hot, I kind of stir it up. As you can see, the Bhagavad Gita is very, very stirred up. I'm loving it.
And him studying the Bhagavad Gita is basically the same compilation of texts that I'm referencing here with the Srimad Bhagavatam. These are all Hindu ancient texts, which really call Sanatana Dharma, not Hindu. But the teachings in this comes from ancient yoga or the shamanic teachings, the shamanic practices from the Dravidian people that came from East Africa. Okay, so dealing with these spiritual practices that are pretty much the same as the Egyptian, the Kushite, the Phoenician, on and on and on. These mystery schools, these spiritual practices, they've been preserved and compiled in these ancient Hindu texts like the Bhagavad Gita, the Srimad Bhagavatam, the Mahabharata, the Yoga Sutras. You see what I'm saying? These different, the Upanishads especially. So even the Ramayana. But these ancient texts have compiled and preserved these teachings. So you see that a lot of celebrities, and I can do a whole list of them, maybe a good 25, 30 of them. And we can go back to the 70s, 80s, and 90s where celebrities have been compelled and inspired to go to the East or go to Africa to unpack these ancient teachings and understand life and our existence and what spirituality actually is, what our reality actually is. So Will Smith had the same inspiration and drive. He went to India, went to a temple. You can see him meditating. You can see him doing the practices, doing the prayers, and so on. And we see that he's been studying the Bhagavad Gita. That's very critical because he's learning exactly what I'm teaching in this video. Basically, we're dealing with accelerated knowledge here. We deal with the simple, plain, presented philosophy from the ancient world because we knew they were experts at experience. They were experts at experiencing the human condition. So they documented and compiled what they experienced. And like scientists, they were able to refine through trial and error what is the best way to reach a certain spiritual goal or even the best way to reach your physical goals. But they put everything in a place of spectrum of importance, and the spiritual was always more significant. So going to these ancient texts in this ancient world, we see that Will Smith has opened his mind and he's exploring these ancient teachings. And that's critical because you should do the same. And he's going to learn in those teachings like the Bhagavad Gita that basically his relationship, his marriage, and all of these different sexual situations that are all throughout society, different levels of society as well, the different classes that are here, that's all an illusion. It's all BS. You know what I'm saying? There is no... The reason why there's a gender war is the same reason why there's a race war. It's because racism is ignorance. And people are ignorant about gender. They don't understand what reality is. Our goal of life should not be your sexual partner. That should not be the thing on the table when you wake up in the morning. That's your goal. If it is, you're causing suffering to yourself and causing suffering to others. That's all you're doing. You're plaguing the earth with pain, regret, confusion, and destruction. I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with sentiment. It's like a man can have affection for a woman that's his daughter, right? He can have affection for a woman that's his sister, his mother. So a gender can have affection for another gender and it not be corrupt or not become selfish or a place of suffering. But when it's a place of attachment, when it's a place of conditions where he has to have a certain amount of wealth, she has to have a certain amount of beauty, she has to have a certain roles that we play, that we have these positions and roles we have, that creates competition. It creates hypergamy. It creates a sexual marketplace. You know what I'm saying? It creates competition between the genders, and that causes harm. That causes pain. That causes an assault or an attack or a war, a gender war. So Will Smith, hopefully he learns, and hopefully you all study, as I keep unpacking on this page, philosophy out of the Bhagavad Gita and other ancient texts about how they try to warn us about our lust and how it will destroy our own life, our own spiritual development of our soul, the spiritual development of our soul. So I'm just hoping that if Will Smith is a genuine person, heard a lot of conspiracies about his personal life, we'll deal with that in the future. You know, the left hand practices and the occult things that he's into, that he may or may not be into. We'll prove it or deal with that in the future. But just fundamentally, the people who are copying his life or trying to embody his success and listen to his teachings, his inspirational speeches that you see him all online. If you're inspired by this man and he's an archetypal embodiment of what you would aspire to be in your life, a successful family, the top family in all of Hollywood and America and in the world, basically, then if you're following behind this and you're infatuated with that type of position, I'm talking to you and I'm saying that you, as well as Will Smith, should be open-minded, like he showing that he is, to the truth about the complexity of what he calls his sexuality, his personal life, his family, and how really all of that doesn't have any value. What really has value is your soul, the supreme, the supreme consciousness within all beings, but most importantly, within inside of yourself. And that's what that's what he's starting to gravitate toward, these teachings, these practices, these spiritual concepts and ideas. Because it's a difference between the material and physical world and the spiritual world. The material world will always disappoint you. And what I mean is marriage, riches, wealth, fame. Like you see a lot of celebrities, they get riches and fame, and they end up committing suicide. You see what I'm saying? That's the only road. If you see, there's a post, an article about how Will Smith is depressed or was suicidal at some point in his career or in his success. Well, that's exactly what happens when you delude yourself and believe that these different concepts and ideas will bring you satisfaction or bliss, but they won't. The only bliss that will come is the true spiritual teachings and the true spiritual mysteries of your life.
During the process, the Oscar nominee reveals a deep personal secret to his family.
I'm writing my book, and it's like exposing my life and so many things that people don't know about me. That was the only time in my life that I ever considered suicide.
It's a subject that also hits home with his wife, Jada Pinkett Smith. Back in 2018, the actress opened up on Instagram about her own struggles, sharing that the suicidal deaths of Kate Spade and Anthony Bourdain, quote, brought up feelings of when I was in such despair and had considered the same demise, often. At the time, Jada added that mental health continues to be a daily practice for her.
This world is nothing but suffering. This physical world is nothing but suffering. But the spiritual worlds are full of bliss, you see. So you have to understand, being born is a disposition. Being born is a misfortune. But to never die, be reborn, or reincarnate ever again is the best beatitude or blessing you could ever receive. To go to heaven, remember? You remember that Christ died and was crucified for you to go to heaven, not for no one to be born here. See? So the same mystery is in the Gnostic teachings of Christianity, which later becomes Christianity. But it originates from Southeast Asia and from East Africa. That's where these teachings originate from. So with that, Will Smith is learning that he could just go into Christianity and learn the same teachings, go right to the Bible. Literally, he can go right there. But I understand sometimes things are too close for us to see. You know what I'm saying? You can't see the forest from the trees. So he has to go explore the world and dive into his curiosity and be able to learn things from a different perspective to get back to where he already knows the fundamental truths that the Christ taught himself. And so that's what he's doing with this spiritual exploration. So we see that, like I said, he claimed he read the Bhagavad Gita. We see that he's basically following the teachings and gleaming from the understanding and wisdom from these ancient gurus like Sadhguru. Now, Sadhguru may not be the most adequate or most sincere teacher or guru I've ever seen, because I've seen far more advanced gurus, I'll be honest, but it's not to throw shade on Sadhguru. It's just maybe his role is not the same role as the advanced masters at these spiritual practices. He's more like the commercial version of it. You know how you have the real street or the real authentic version of something, but then you have the commercial, watered down mainstream version? Well, he's like the mainstream version of the ancient yoga or shamanic or the yogic teachings or these ancient spiritual teachings. He's like the commercial version of it, where you can package it and sell it quickly, and it's palatable for people's minds who never heard of it before. But the point is, maybe Will Smith will go deeper. I've seen his daughter started to chant the mantras, started to chant the Hindu mantras, the ancient Sanskrit mantras, and his daughter is starting to get into the ancient teachings and so on. So she's going a little deeper into it. Maybe Jada will go a little deeper into it. Who knows? But Will Smith is doing the fundamental steps to expose himself to these ancient mysteries, ancient teachings. And Sadhguru is an okay starter kit. He's an okay introductory level or introduction to these ancient spiritual teachings. So that's excellent. That's good. So we're not going to criticize effort. You know what I'm saying? So we see that he's done that. So he's trying to learn what I'm teaching right here in this video. That his very dilemmas in his own life with depression and his sexual competition with his wife and maybe other women, who knows? And there's some other sexual stuff, rumors going around about his personal life. You know, I don't want to get into that, but all of that is going to bring nothing but suffering and confusion and confoundment. You're never going to be fully satisfied. Those desires are temporary, so the satisfaction of them are what? Temporary. But you need to get eternal and immortal satisfaction and bliss. And you get that by having compassion, love for all beings, not just that woman because she sexually satisfied you, but all beings, all entities. Even the worst nightmare of an animal, you know what I'm saying, like that tiger or that lion, or that crocodile, they may rip your head off. But you need to understand that bliss is self-brimming from within you. You have to understand all beings that are conscious are originally your own self. They're just at different levels of consciousness. So some entities, some beings, some animals are the feet and legs and toes. But some entities of beings, maybe you, are the brain, the heart, the thoughts, the eyes. You see what I'm saying? It's different levels of consciousness, but all is that same being. And that is the great teaching. So you cannot have that consciousness when you're dealing with duality, like your wife is obligated to play a position or role and be subservient to you, or the male has to be submissive or subservient to her with working for her, you know, all of these different constructs, these different positions, because all that's going to do is bring a tug of war of suffering. And literally, you know, it's going to produce children that are going to be in hell, that are going to suffer because of divorce or because of broken homes and et cetera, et cetera. You know where I'm going. So that is the Kali Yuga. That's the embodiment of Kali Yuga. Now, Will Smith is the only one who's been exploring spirituality. Jada Pinkett was known in the past, and even probably still, exploring spirituality to escape or to find liberation from the hell that they thought would be their completion or their satisfaction or their earthly heaven in their marriage. But we all need to learn from them and let them be an example that your lust or your sexual infatuation with whatever woman you're courting, whatever for your woman, whatever man you think you're interested in, they won't be able to make you content. You see, maybe for a good 5 years, like I said earlier, but biology is going, within 7 to 10 years, you're not going to be attracted to that. So the man is going to get into sex addiction or drug addiction or alcoholism. The woman going to do the same. These different addictions, it's going to show itself in one way or the other. So get a grip, get control over your sensibilities and your impulses, and try your hardest today to put down your attachments and all of the distractions to reach that bliss that can be found right now today. Just like when you were a child, all you did all day was play, deal with art, and deal with fantasy. You know what I'm saying? Cartoons and so on. And deal with your different imaginative faculties and try different ways to reach bliss. Now, the problem is we got kids that today they obsessed with sugar. But if you could take the sugar out of your life, deal with the development of your brain as an adult with the purity and bliss and natural impulse of curiosity that the children have. Just keep working on that. Keep reading. Keep dealing with the arts. Keep dealing with the science that's behind our life. Keep asking questions. You notice when you 5, 6, 7 years old, you ask all of these questions, like a million questions. Well, that's called self-inquiry. That's what yogis, sages, bhikshatanas, monks, and so on, that's what they do. They do all day. They do like children do. They ask their parents, which is the great mother and the great father, which is entities or the God, questions all day. They ask angels questions. They ask other sages questions. They ask demons, ghosts, and all of these other type of entities that are in human form questions. They ask inquiry about what? Their self, about life, about God, until they find the truth. When you find the truth, you find bliss. Because now you know. That's all that really matters. Once you know that God is within you, that you're not this body, that you are that supreme itself, there's nothing else to know. There's nothing else to gain. There's nothing else that you can grip or put within inside of you that's going to make you content. Because all that you're seeing externally is yourself broken up into different pieces. But once you know that at some point in the future, you're going to be back in union with yourself. All of this will die away and decay, and you'll be back to your supreme state of bliss again, but not in shards and pieces, but whole. And that truth is the liberating teaching, the teaching of what's called, there's two different concepts that I got to deal with. One is called soterology. Soterology is the study of salvation of your soul. Look it up, soterology. It's in all of the different ancient mystery schools and teachings and spiritual traditions in the world. 2 is eschatology. Eschatology is end-time events that will bring about the catalyst for people to seek salvation of their soul, which will end up being soterology. So eschatology is the study of the end-time events. You read the New Testament, it's always about the end times, the last days, and it's important because the last days is the Kali Yuga. And in the Kali Yuga, the Christ will be born. But that's metaphorical. That's not literal. It's allegorical. The Christ consciousness would be born in many children. Even in the Buddhist prophecies, from the Pali Canon and from the ancient Buddhist texts, they prophesy these bodhisattvas being incarnating on the planet. Krishna, out of the Srimad Bhagavatam and out of the Mahabharata, it talks about how Krishna and all of the heavenly hosts, all of the different devas and entities are going to incarnate in human form. So understand that mystery and understand that that's supposed to happen during the Kali Yuga, you see. So let's keep moving. So we see that Jada Pinkett herself has been seen to explore and try to get into meditation and to overcome her dissatisfaction, her suffering. Because even at that high level of success, having the most adequate choice mate on the whole planet, for her obviously would be Will Smith. And I'm sure for him at that time was Jada Pinkett in the 90s. But they got the best thing they thought they could attain. But they still suffer, just like the ancient sages taught. Well, that's what they warned about in the Kali Yuga, but they also told us a way out and how to get liberation and get complete bliss and satisfaction before we die. And we have to go through the routes that we see even Jada Pinkett and Will Smith are taking. Study the ancient texts and then practice the ancient practices. It's that simple. And on this channel here, following the things that I'm teaching that I'm going to be breaking down from month to month and from day to day, it's going to be that same exact path. It's that direction. So let's keep moving. So yeah, we see Jada Pinkett and her mother trying to introduce themselves to these different ancient practices again as well. So with that, hopefully you understand that lust, sexuality, and so on was never a place that was supposed to bring complete contentment or bliss or satisfaction. It never did in nature, in the biological world. It won't in our human world. What makes us think that we're more special or significant or exceptional than, let's say, the praying mantis or the black widow spider or any of these other species of animals, where the male dominates and destroys the female for the sexual practice or for the sexual act, and the males destroy each other for competition over that female for the sexual act, and on the other side, the female destroying the males for the sexual act. What makes us think as humans we're more exceptional? We're excluded from the damage that can be done through lust. What makes us think we're any different? So the regulation of sexuality, which is called marriage, was introduced to society during like the Iron Age, Bronze Age. And when it was introduced, it was like through arranged marriages and different tactics and methodologies, whether it was through polygamy, polygyny, or polyamory types of relationships, marriages. But it was introduced because of this reason, because in nature, sexuality is naturally dangerous and comes with a price of suffering, period. And if you're not married for something outside of lust, you're going to destroy your life or destroy your psychology and your soul, even though you tried to escape it through doing it the correct route, which would be the marriage. You still destroy your life. And especially the children that are born in that condition. And if you were born in that condition of a broken home, then you know exactly what I'm talking about. So in that sense, let's learn from the past, let's learn from the ancient teachings, let's apply wisdom, and let's seek the spiritual truth for this, and let's get on the spiritual path. Let's try to realize the truth about the supreme deity, which is within inside of our own soul. And you can realize that today, and you can reach that bliss within the next year or so once you unravel that these trance-like blissful states that you don't have to attain through drugs or through sex can be self-imbued inside of yourself. You just have to let go of layers of your attachments, of your ideas, of your ideologies, and the different preconceptions that you may have about life. You have to shed all of that and reteach yourself and relearn what are the principal and critical things about our reality. And once you do that, you'll be able to take that breath of fresh air and reach clarity. And maybe you even potentially can reach enlightenment, which, like we said, is the fourth goal, called moksha, or liberation of your soul. So with that, hopefully we can put a discrimination, a difference between the material world, the physical world, and its pain and the suffering innately from the spiritual world, and the bliss and the levels of attainment of satisfaction you can reach and contentment through seeking that path. And so with that, stay tuned, because we'll be going up through that path and breaking down those ancient teachings, and we'll be disqualifying the world and the human world or humanity, and qualifying the spiritual world and the supreme, which we might call God. With that, peace.
I want a real love, dark skinned and Viv love. That Jada in that real love.